R-Vee owners are about to find out the hard way. 6 states just changed the rules, quietly, and nobody bothered to tell the people holding the loans. No letters, no alerts. Just emissions paperwork getting tighter overnight. And now, certain motorhomes are on the clock. Dealers already know which rigs are at risk. Manufacturers already pulled back production. But owners are still assuming they're safe. Here's the problem. Once these bans take effect, it won't feel like a ban at all. You just won't be able to register, or insure properly, or resell without bleeding value. And by the time most people realize what happened, the window is already closed. Let's break down the 6 states that moved first, and why timing just became everything. Massachusetts. The first signal did not arrive as a warning or a headline, but as a quiet change in how paperwork would be judged going forward. Massachusetts moved first, quietly aligning itself with a regulatory framework that treats heavier motor vehicles differently once they cross defined thresholds. That alignment did not announce itself as a ban. It arrived as a change in certification expectations, and that subtle shift altered the market immediately. Manufacturers responded before most buyers noticed. Certification rules tightened. Future approvals became conditional. Production plans were adjusted without public drama. Inventory that already existed remained valid, but anything planned beyond the cutoff entered uncertain territory. That single distinction changed how dealers priced, ordered, and promised availability. The reason Massachusetts matters is not size, it is sequence. Early adoption creates proof of enforcement. Once enforcement exists in one state, assumptions collapse elsewhere. Other jurisdictions watch closely, manufacturers act defensively. Supply chains respond conservatively. That chain reaction begins long before public awareness catches up. Financial pressure appears in stages. First comes firmness. Dealers protect existing inventory because replacements are no longer guaranteed. Asking prices hold. Incentives disappear. That phase feels like confidence, but it is not stability. It is insulation. Next comes hesitation. Buyers ask questions. Registration language matters more than features. Timelines stretch. Units sit longer. Carrying costs accumulate quietly in the background. Interest charges do not pause. Insurance does not pause. Storage does not pause. Then comes the long phase most people miss. Resale expectations adjust. Vehicles tied to uncertain certification lose liquidity. Out-of-state transactions introduce friction. Transport adds cost. Paperwork adds delay. Every added step weakens negotiating position. Value erodes without mileage changing. Massachusetts demonstrates how regulatory pressure transfers risk. It does not stay with manufacturers. It does not stay with dealers. It lands with ownership. Once paperwork becomes conditional, responsibility shifts downstream. That shift is rarely explained during a sale. This environment changes decision-making. Rushing becomes expensive. Waiting without information becomes risky. The advantage sits with verification. Written confirmation matters. Clear registration paths matter. Timing matters more than configuration. None of this suggests ownership becomes impossible. It suggests ownership becomes sensitive to timing. The window between safe purchase and exposed purchase narrows. That window closes quietly. Massachusetts earns its place at the start of this countdown because it shows the pattern before it spreads. Early rules create early behavior changes. Those changes shape pricing, availability, and leverage well ahead of public conversation. The takeaway here is not urgency, it is awareness. When the first state moves, the market listens. Those who listen early protect options. Those who notice late pay premiums they did not expect. This is how a regulatory trigger works. It does not shock. It compresses. It narrows choices. It rewards preparation and punishes assumption. That pattern begins here, before it accelerates elsewhere, carrying consequences forward into every decision that follows. Nothing about this process feels dramatic while it unfolds. It feels technical. It feels distant. Yet its effects surface later, when options vanish and explanations feel thin. That is why early movement matters. It gives space to think, verify, and choose deliberately. Once the trigger spreads, choice contracts. Preparation then becomes the only remaining advantage left in markets that reward foresight and punish delay without apology or warning today everywhere. New Jersey. This is where money stopped acting like protection and started amplifying risk instead. New Jersey sits at the center of a high-value motorhome market, where buyers expect flexibility, leverage, and choice. That expectation was built over decades of steady availability. It is now under strain, not because demand disappeared, but because certainty did. New Jersey aligned itself with the same emissions compliance framework already shaping other states. The shift did not arrive as a headline. It arrived as guidance. Certification requirements tightened. Approvals became conditional. Manufacturers adjusted quietly, knowing that high-value markets magnify risk when paperwork changes. The impact here is sharper because money amplifies exposure. High-value purchases carry higher financing balances, longer holding periods, and narrower exit paths. When registration certainty weakens, hesitation grows. Hesitation slows transactions. Slower transactions increase carrying costs. Those costs do not appear on stickers, but they reshape negotiations. Dealers respond defensively. Existing inventory is protected. Replacement orders are treated cautiously. Promises become vague. Language shifts. Availability turns from assumed to questioned. That subtle change affects buyer psychology immediately. Financial pressure shows up first in appraisal behavior. Trade valuations soften before asking prices move. Dealers insulate themselves against future friction. Private buyers hesitate longer. Listings sit. Time becomes the cost driver, not mileage. Insurance considerations follow closely. High-value R-Vee assets often rely on agreed valuations that lag true replacement cost. Regulatory uncertainty tightens underwriting assumptions. Coverage becomes conservative. Settlement gaps appear only after loss events, when options are limited and timelines compressed. Financing behavior adapts as well. Lenders evaluate collateral differently when certification carries conditions. Approval processes slow, terms tighten, documentation increases. What once felt routine becomes procedural. Each added step adds friction to closing. New Jersey earns this position because it demonstrates how quickly confidence erodes when certainty weakens. Price does not protect against policy. Prestige does not override classification. The market recalibrates regardless of brand perception. Ownership dynamics change subtly. Resale planning becomes timing dependent. Out-of-state transactions introduce cost and delay. Transport logistics matter more. Paperwork matters more. Flexibility narrows. None of this eliminates capability or comfort. High-value motorhomes remain well-built and desirable. The issue is not quality, it is exposure. When the margin for error shrinks, even strong assets feel fragile financially. This is the stage where patience regains power. Verification matters more than enthusiasm. Written clarity matters more than verbal reassurance. Decisions slow, and that slowness protects capital. New Jersey sits here in the countdown because it proves an uncomfortable truth. The higher the price, the less room there is for uncertainty. What feels like strength becomes sensitivity. What once moved easily now requires timing. As this sequence continues, the pressure migrates downward into broader segments. High-value markets feel it first. Practical markets feel it next. Watching that transition early preserves leverage. Missing it transfers cost. The story does not end here, it accelerates. Each step tightens the market further, reshaping expectations and narrowing choices. Understanding this stage prepares for what follows, when availability, not price, becomes the defining constraint shaping outcomes everywhere very soon. That shift catches unprepared, especially when timing windows close without notice. If this breakdown is helping you see timing risks before they become expensive mistakes, hit like so others find it, subscribe for updates as this situation evolves, and share your perspective below so real-world insight shapes what we cover next. Washington. What once felt like an advantage suddenly began working in reverse, turning strength into scrutiny. That approach makes its impact easy to miss until consequences surface. In this case, capability itself becomes the liability, because vehicles designed to do more now fall into categories that demand more compliance. Washington aligned its emissions framework with California, applying classification rules based on weight and certification rather than purpose. Once that alignment took effect, registration expectations changed without pause. Platforms once valued for strength, towing, and long-term durability now face scrutiny that has nothing to do with performance. This matters because capability shaped buying logic. Heavier construction meant safety. Commercial-grade components meant longevity. Buyers trusted that overbuilt systems reduced risk. Regulation reverses that equation. The same attributes that inspired confidence now trigger oversight. Financial exposure follows a predictable pattern. Financing obligations continue regardless of paperwork status. Insurance remains active. Storage costs accumulate. If registration questions arise, none of those expenses stop. Ownership carries cost, even when usage stalls. Dealers adjust behavior quietly. Orders slow. Replacement planning tightens. Inventory already delivered gains temporary insulation. That insulation does not last. As questions spread, hesitation grows. Time on lot increases. Carrying costs rise invisibly. Resale options narrow next. In-state transactions become complicated. Out-of-state sales introduce transport expense and administrative delay. Each additional step reduces leverage. Value erodes without a single mile added. Maintenance dynamics add pressure. Capability platforms rely on heavier components, specialized parts, and commercial supply chains. As production volumes tighten, lead times extend. Downtime increases. Lost use becomes part of the ownership equation. Insurance valuation struggles to reflect compounded risk. Agreed values lag replacement reality. Regulatory uncertainty tightens underwriting assumptions. Settlement gaps appear after incidents, when options are limited and timelines compressed. Washington earns this position because it demonstrates a critical inflection point. When strength becomes exposure, the market recalibrates. Buyers rethink assumptions. Sellers hedge. Confidence shifts from hardware to paperwork. None of this removes the reasons these motorhomes were chosen. They remain stable, capable, and well-engineered. The issue is timing sensitivity layered onto ownership economics. Capability does not offset uncertainty. This stage in the sequence marks transition. What felt niche becomes structural. Once capability platforms face friction, broader segments follow. The market does not reverse quickly once this threshold is crossed. Awareness here preserves flexibility. Verification restores leverage. Rushing magnifies risk. Waiting without information does the same. The advantage sits with clarity. Washington signals that the environment has changed, not through bans or announcements, but through process. That process quietly reshapes outcomes when availability tightens, choice narrows. Those watching early retain control. Those noticing late absorb cost. This is how capability becomes risk. Not suddenly but steadily, as classification overtakes intention and timing overtakes preference. The next stage accelerates this pressure further. That pressure rarely feels dramatic at first. It feels administrative, procedural, and distant. Yet its effect compounds daily. Missed weekends, deferred trips, unexpected expenses. Each small delay reshapes ownership math. Over time, confidence erodes, flexibility disappears, and decisions become reactive. That is the cost of ignoring early signals. when markets quietly recalibrate beneath familiar assumptions for owners paying attention later. Oregon. At this point, the pressure stops targeting edges of the market and starts pushing inward from every direction. Instead, pressure builds evenly across the market, touching nearly every category at once. This is where the situation stops feeling isolated and starts feeling structural. When Oregon aligned its compliance framework, the effect was not selective. It was comprehensive. Oregon adopted emission standards modeled closely after California, applying them broadly rather than narrowly. Classification hinges on weight, certification, and future approval eligibility. Once that alignment took effect, manufacturers adjusted allocations immediately. Orders that once flowed routinely became conditional. Some future production simply disappeared from planning. This matters because Oregon represents balance, neither the largest market nor the smallest. Not dominated by luxury, not driven by entry-level demand. It reflects the middle of the ownership spectrum, where predictability matters more than novelty. The first impact appears in supply continuity. Dealers discover that replacements are no longer guaranteed. Inventory already delivered becomes finite. New availability becomes uncertain. That shift alters negotiation dynamics overnight. Pricing firms up temporarily, not from strength, but from caution. Then comes the squeeze. Buyers hesitate. Dealers wait. Units linger. Floor plan interest accumulates quietly in the background. Carrying costs rise without announcement. Pressure builds invisibly. Trade in behavior adjusts next. Appraisals soften as exit paths narrow. Dealers protect themselves against future friction. Private transactions slow. Listings remain active longer. Value erosion begins without mileage changing. Financing dynamics adapt as well. Lenders factor in regulatory exposure. Approval processes lengthen. Documentation requirements increase. Terms tighten subtly. What once felt routine now feels procedural. Maintenance considerations compound the issue. As production volumes adjust downward, parts availability tightens. Lead times extend. Downtime increases. Each delay reduces usage value. Ownership costs persist, regardless of utilization. Insurance valuation follows conservatively. Modified R-Vee assets often rely on agreed values that trail real replacement cost. Regulatory uncertainty narrows underwriting tolerance. Settlement assumptions tighten. Gaps appear when losses occur. Oregon earns this position because it captures the broadest effect. This is no longer about premium exposure or specialized capability. It is about volume. When broad segments feel pressure, the market recalibrates fully. None of this suggests ownership becomes unviable. It suggests ownership becomes timing sensitive. Decisions made without clarity carry greater consequence. Waiting without awareness becomes expensive. Acting without verification becomes risk. The squeeze works slowly. Choices narrow first. Then leverage disappears. Finally, cost emerges. By the time effects feel obvious, adjustment options are limited. This stage changes buyer psychology. Confidence gives way to caution. Caution slows movement. Slow movement reshapes pricing. The cycle feeds itself. Oregon sits here because it signals transition, from isolated disruption to systemic adjustment. When middle markets feel strain, upstream and downstream segments follow. As this sequence continues, availability tightens further. The next stage shifts focus from supply pressure to outright restriction. That transition accelerates outcomes. Awareness here matters. It creates space to plan, verify, and choose deliberately. Without it, decisions compress and mistakes multiply. This is how a broad market squeeze works. It does not announce itself. It accumulates quietly, reshaping behavior one transaction at a time, until the entire environment feels different than expected. Those paying attention early adapt smoothly. Those noticing late react under pressure, absorbing cost, delay, and regret that could have been avoided with earlier recognition and measured timing. If you want clear, no-noise updates as these rules tighten and availability shifts, subscribe now. This story is still unfolding, and staying informed early is what preserves options before decisions become rushed, and leverage quietly disappears. California. Everything tightens the moment certification replaces choice, and production plans begin answering to one decision center. When California clarifies a rule, the rest of the supply chain listens. That is why this position matters more than any other before it. California serves as the gatekeeper because of scale, the largest concentration of motorhome registrations. The deepest dealer networks, the most influence over manufacturing decisions. When certification standards tighten here, production planning changes everywhere. California clarified that emissions compliance would apply without broad exemptions. Classification depends on weight and certification eligibility, not intended use. Once that clarification arrived, manufacturers adjusted immediately. Some platforms could not meet future requirements. Certification pathways narrowed. Paperwork became the constraint. Inventory already built remained viable. Future production entered uncertainty. That single distinction reshaped behavior overnight. Dealers shifted messaging. Replacement orders slowed. Availability became conditional rather than assumed. Financial pressure concentrates quickly in this environment. California dealers carry significant floor plan exposure. Large inventories require constant movement. When replacement supply becomes uncertain, pricing behavior shifts. Short-term firmness appears. Incentives retreat. That firmness masks underlying strain. Then timing takes control. Units linger. Carrying costs accumulate daily. Interest does not pause. Insurance does not pause. Storage does not pause. Each unsold unit quietly consumes margin. Trade behavior reacts next. Appraisals soften as exit certainty weakens. Out-of-state transactions introduce cost and delay. Buyers hesitate. Liquidity drops before prices visibly adjust. Financing dynamics adapt as well. Lenders reassess collateral risk. Approval process is slow. Documentation requirements expand. Terms tighten. What once closed smoothly now encounters friction. Maintenance economics compound the issue. Reduced production volume tightens parts pipelines. Lead times extend. Downtime grows. Lost use becomes part of ownership cost. Capability remains, but availability erodes. Insurance valuation follows conservatively. Agreed values often trail replacement reality. Regulatory uncertainty tightens underwriting assumptions. Settlement gaps emerge after loss events, when timing and options are limited. California earns this position because it transforms policy into practice. Other states signal. California enforces. The market reacts accordingly. None of this removes the appeal of ownership. Comfort remains. Performance remains. Familiar platforms remain. What disappears is certainty. The gatekeeper effect spreads outward. Manufacturers standardize conservatively. Dealers hedge. Buyers feel pressure without explanation. Timing replaces choice. This is the moment when patience becomes leverage. Verification becomes protection. Written clarity outweighs promises. California does not announce deadlines loudly. It sets conditions and lets the market adjust. Those adjustments travel faster than public understanding. The final stage moves beyond supply pressure into fundamental assumption change. When fallback options disappear, the market recalibrates fully. Understanding this position matters because it explains why choices narrow quickly once California moves. The gate closes quietly. Those already inside adapt. Those approaching later face constraints. This is how supply becomes controlled without declarations, through process, scale, and timing. Preparation creates space. Assumption creates cost. The next stage completes the sequence. When the gatekeeper sets terms, the entire market responds, and late awareness becomes the most expensive mistake of all. This environment rewards discipline, careful pacing, and attention to detail while punishing haste, assumption, and blind trust, especially when markets compress faster than expectations allow without warning signals appearing. New York. The final break happens when alternatives no longer feel like protection, and every option carries conditions. Diesel pressure elsewhere created confidence that alternatives would hold. That belief dissolves here, not through prohibition, but through conditional survival. New York aligned its framework with California, but the mechanics matter. Compliance does not arrive as an outright stop. It arrives as dependency. Registration viability hinges on credit balances, certification math, and ongoing eligibility rather than permanent exemption. That distinction is everything. Some platforms remain viable today because manufacturers hold emissions credits generated elsewhere. Those credits offset internal combustion registrations. They do not guarantee future approval. They operate like a temporary bridge, not solid ground. When balances shift, the bridge narrows. Dealer guidance reflects this quietly. Language changes. Delivery promises soften. Timelines gain conditions. Nothing dramatic appears on the surface. Underneath, planning adjusts defensively. Financial exposure here is layered. Buyers often assume alternatives protect value. That assumption weakens when fallback options rely on variables outside ownership control. Resale planning becomes sensitive to timing rather than condition. Exit windows matter more than mileage. Pricing behavior reflects this uncertainty. Short-term confidence gives way to longer listings. Negotiations hinge on paperwork clarity. Buyers hesitate, sellers wait. Time replaces leverage. Financing adapts next. Lenders assess collateral through a regulatory lens. Approval processes slow. Terms tighten subtly. Documentation expands. What once closed easily now encounters friction. Insurance valuation follows cautiously. When eligibility depends on external credit math, underwriting assumptions tighten. Agreed values trail replacement reality. Settlement gaps emerge after losses when choices are limited. Maintenance economics compound pressure. Reduced production planning tightens parts pipelines. Software updates alter system behavior. Downtime stretches. Lost use becomes part of ownership cost. New York earns the top position because it removes the illusion of safety. There is no default option left. When both primary and alternative paths carry conditions, the market recalibrates entirely. None of this removes capability or comfort. Ownership remains possible. What disappears is predictability. Planning becomes conditional. Decisions compress. This is the final stage of the sequence. Early triggers created pressure. Middle stages spread impact. Here, assumptions collapse. Awareness becomes decisive. Those who verify documentation, track timing, and move deliberately preserve leverage. Those who assume stability discover exposure later. The lesson here is not fear, it is discipline. When safe defaults vanish, attention becomes advantage. Markets reward those who recognize dependency before it breaks. New York closes the countdown because it completes the pattern. What began quietly now stands fully visible. Choices narrow, timing accelerates. Consequences arrive faster. This environment favors preparation over reaction. It punishes delay masked as patience. Once fallback options carry risk, the market stops forgiving mistakes. Those watching closely retain control. Those noticing late pay more, wait longer, and adjust under pressure. That divide defines outcomes moving forward, as regulation, supply, and timing intersect without warning, leaving little room for error or recovery once conditions change again. That reality reshapes expectations, forcing reevaluation of timing, documentation, and exit strategy. Because when certainty fades, flexibility disappears first, and the cost of discovering that too late is measured not in inconvenience, but in prolonged holding, liquidity, and negotiating power. This situation is moving fast, and the people who stay informed are the ones who keep their options. If this breakdown helped you see the risks before they turn into expensive mistakes, hit like so others don't get caught off guard. Subscribe for clear updates as these rules tighten and the market shifts. And drop a comment below. Are you buying, selling, or holding right now? Your experience helps everyone navigate what's coming next.